Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo
Con la propria vita.
esiste anche grazie a te.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to this meeting with the title New Saints. And this is the final encounter of the 46th Rimini meeting. For another reason you'll see at the end, in a certain sense, it's the first encounter of the next meeting. Leaving you in this state of suspense, I'd like to welcome and thank for being here His Excellency Domenico Sorrentino, the Archbishop of Assisi. Next to him, Marco Cesare Giorgio, a lawyer and the president of the Pier Giorgio Frassati Cultural Center in Turin. Professor Paolo Asolan, Professor of Fundamental Pastoral Theology and President, Dean of the Pontifical Institute Redemptor Hominis of the Pontifical Lateran University. The person you don't see is Antonia Salzano, the mother of Carlo Acutis. She wasn't able to come today because she had an important event in Rome to attend, given that the beatification on the 7th of September. So she left us a video interview before she left that we'd like to show you, because she was here to look after the exhibition on her son here, and unfortunately she's not been able to stay until the end. So, new saints. New saints because they're saints who aren't saints who've been in a monastery, or they're not members of a religious order. They've not been ordained. They've been saints within ordinary life. They've lived like us in the perfectly normal conditions of a normal life, characterized by the same normality of school and work. And we'll try and discover this evening how it's possible to reach a level of sainthood within normality, because this is that new aspect. It's as if we were too used to thinking about sainthood as having particular prerequisites or certain conditions, rather and instead we can tell here that that's simply not the case. It's to know the normal conditions of life. We'll begin with Pier Giorgio Frassati, and I'll ask Marco Cesare Giorgio to tell us a bit about where he met, where he discovered how exemplary Pier Giorgio Frassati was, because you've underlined many times that Pier Giorgio Frassati was a role model of civic and religious life. Where have you found this to be the case? Thank you, Bernhard. So the kind of dry answer that comes to me first to answer your question is that because he'd understood how to be happy in life, in the ordinary circumstances of life, like you described, those of every day, of a guy, a perfectly normal guy. Pier Giorgio was of one of the richest families of Turin at the beginning of the 1900s. He was athletic, he was good looking, he could have done anything he wanted with his life. And instead, he found the way to be happy was in front of, and he decided on that to live his life the way he'd found how to be happy. And it's difficult to explain Pier Giorgio as a whole in the time we have available to us. I'll try to underline a few character traits of his. Starting by reading 10 lines, I think, answer your question neatly in how why Pier Giorgio was and is an example, and he bears witness even today for all of us the ease of living as he did. There are 10 lines of a writer called Stefano Iacomuzzi, who lived right after the death of Pier Giorgio and who knew all his friends directly afterwards, and he says, I always liked Pier Giorgio, even when the shadow of sainthood had already flourished within him, and I heard people talk about him. He was a young guy by someone who already knew him, and I liked him immediately. Perhaps contrasting, compared to the difference of how some other, holy kids used to be. He was a counterpoint to the distant images of the great martyrs, confessors, and bishops, almost unbelievable heroes from the past. If I had to choose one hero, this guy was more like mine. His examples were far more practical, his examples far closer to those that I imagined I would live. But I didn't think about sainthood. How can you be a saint? How could someone you meet on the streets be saint? Someone who looks like you, who's a student with your same problems, who's living through the same experience as me. I'd understood sainthood wrong, or at least, I had one that I'd fished out from homilies and from things I'd read. I didn't think about grace and about choice that permeates that transforms that yes into a heroic experience. The people in the gospel weren't called to say yes to everything. Pier Giorgio, with in a simple way, perhaps without even realizing, did say yes to everything, and this accumulation of heroic virtues turned him into a hero. Pier Giorgio, like Carlo Acutis and all the saints, at a certain point, he made a decision. Cesare the other night, citing Giussani yesterday, said that to be simple, you have to be decisive. You have to decide on which side you are, who you belong to. Pier Giorgio, like all the saints, like Carlo Acutis, made this decision. He decided who he belonged to and what his happiness depended on. And he lived his entire life. Pier Giorgio made the decision as a kid when he was 13, 14, and it's a decision that obviously needs to be made every day. We're called every day we have to make that decision every day, even until you're 99. And he chose on what side he belonged and to who he belonged to. And this is because, as Iacomuzzi said, often we have the wrong idea of a saint. A saint, as Benedict XVI said, and even Don Giussani, basically with the same words, that a saint isn't a person with superpowers. Rather, it's a person who's truly a man who lives the ideal for which he was made. And this was what Pier Giorgio did. In the ordinary circumstances of life, he practiced this ideal. Pope John Paul II, when he inaugurated the Mass for the beatification of Pier Giorgio, he asked in a very provocatory way, what did he do that was what did this guy do that was special? This is what he did. He lived his whole life in an integrated way, every aspect of his life, in a united sense, the politics, his social aspect, his studies, his charity work. But Giorgio participated in all the different realities with which he came into contact at school, at university, in politics. He was signed up to the Popular Party, to Catholic Action, and Don Paolo says it in his book, not because he was a frenetic guy, but because he understood that everything was connected to that ideal that he'd met. You asked, how can he be an example today, and what to say today about Pier Giorgio? What can Pier Giorgio's life tell us today? Surely he's well known for his charity work. The president of the prime minister today mentioned that. I'd put that example among the things I'd hoped to say, because it seemed significant, and maybe Don Paolo will go deeper into this conception about his charity later. But Pier Giorgio was not very much known for it. Everything he had, he gave to the poor. As a rich guy of a bourgeois family, his parents at a certain point realized that sometimes he came home without shoes, without clothes, and so they started to take them away from him, because they thought either he was losing them or he was gambling what he had. So they started giving him even less, and still everything he had, he gave it all away. So despite all this, he'd go and visit the poorest quarters of Turin, but he still had a very clear definition of what it meant to be charitable. It wasn't, just voluntary work, but he himself did it. I go myself to meet the poor. People asked him, why are you going to these poor areas to meet these families? Why are you mixing yourself up with these kinds of people? You could do anything you wanted. You could do your charity work in another way. And he said very dryly, in two ways: Jesus visits me every day in the Eucharist, and I try and give back his visit in any way I can to the poor. And that I go and visit them because I don't want to just give them something. I want to share something with them. I want to bring a word of comfort to them. And he had this clear in his mind that being charitable wasn't just about answering to a need, because only God can answer to a need, but also to accompany them in that need. So I'll summarize by saying two quick things. What are the fruits that Pier Giorgio has left us today in the world of the Church? Surely it's the role of the laity. Pier Giorgio was a layman, and when he was asked clearly, well, why don't you become a priest? Because clearly at the time, we're looking at the 1920s, before the Second Vatican Council, it was quite normal that if you had a shred of faith, to someone to ask you, do you want to be a priest? And he said very clearly, without any problems, he said, no. I want to bring to the world, as you said earlier, Bernhard, to bring that which I've discovered. I want to be a mineral engineer, to go and work in the mines and help the miners to improve their way of life, to improve their quality of life. A second point, which perhaps is more interesting for us today, is that the vocation to sainthood is for everyone, not, for superhumans. Vocations to sainthood are for everyone, and we're all called to make that decision every day. That Pier Giorgio took at 13, and Carlo Acutis at 7. And thirdly, a lot of works from, many realities born in the world. There's many things, including the cultural centre I work for, that was born 40 years ago after John Paul II's visit to Turin. Very, very final thing that refers, maybe more directly to the meeting and its history. In 74, Luciana Frassati, who was the sister of Pier Giorgio, the person who best knew in his life, there was a year's difference between them because they basically lived together. And Pier Giorgio, even despite the fact she didn't know exactly what Pier Giorgio did, she discovered it later, as most people did. But when he died, she was the person who most brought ahead who shared this image of him to the world. And she died in 2007, but she championed his cause of beatification. And in 78, she came to learn about this new reality, this new thing called communion liberation in Turin. And so she went to look for Don Piero Soldi, who wrote a lot of books about him in Via San Domenico. the place where the church Pier Giorgio used to go to, and she went to this old retired guy, Don Primo, who was this young priest, came down to the reception, and she meets her, and Luciana says to Don Primo, "You're like my brother." She'd understood that in the charism of communion liberation, there was something shared with that which Pier Giorgio had. I think this speaks to us a lot today into the history of the meeting, gives a piece of, increases our responsibility by a bit to discover and carry on and protect this charism of Pier Giorgio, which has so much to say even about the charism of CL, and so it's an increased responsibility for us. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Professor Asolan, we've just heard from Marco that he had a radical awareness that he wasn't just being a nice guy. He had true depths, had a real deep origin. You wrote a book that said "I, but not I," the spiritual biography of Pier Giorgio, which refers to the famous phrase of St. Paul. Can you explain in what his self-awareness consisted in? So, thanks. Good evening to everybody. Thanks for the invitation. I'll start by saying that this is really a taster, if you like, an aperitif. If it happens to you like it happened to me, to go into this ocean, which is the sort of mystery of simplicity, like Marco said, and Bernhard, we're talking of a guy who was, for those who saw him every day, he didn't represent anything exceptional, but in reality, what had happened in him, this digging into that seems to never finish digging into it. So in the depths of his awareness, Frassati shared his life, or he let flow into his life the life of Christ. And on one side, this enlarged and simplified, enriched, confirmed, and according to a beauty and attraction that those who met him already at first glance, then there's some explicit testimonies about this, that already his way of looking at things, his face, could let you glimpse this something more, which can't explain it either in his context, even given the social sanctity of Turin people, but not even the Salesians, the Jesuits who formed him, or Catholic action in which he took part, the popular party that he dedicated himself to, or the mountains that he went to, even to the Dominican, to Father Domenico, who was the sort of last point of his itinerary. So this book was born from this question, but what happened? What aspect of the mystery of Christ was lived in him, lives in him? I was a bit tired if you of all the biographies that obviously not that Don Primo's one, but who's here? There's a book by Don Primo, Towards the Absolute, which if you can find it from the Echo book, it's worth reading. But the question I asked myself was, okay, he used to go and he used to collect things, he said prayers for the dead in the cemetery, etc. Why did he do this? The response was because the center of his awareness was the life of Christ. So to not get lost in this, but I took three phrases which seem like they could illustrate a bit what I'm trying to say here. The first one was taken from an article that he wrote, that was written by Filippo Turati shortly after his death, and he said how this guy was a socialist and he was very struck by Pier Giorgio, and he wrote, he was truly a man, Pier Giorgio Frassati, whose death at 24 years old, giving a life like a thief took from him. There's something new and unusual, building with new bricks, that fills with reverent wonder even those who didn't share his faith. And it finishes, between hate and proud, the spirit of dominion, and this Christian who works like he believes, who acts like he speaks, who's intransigent in his religion, but a way of sharing and giving something to everybody. This is the novelty that appeared to those who could see it but couldn't understand it. It's the power of service. The service of which Jesus says, the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life for many. So even simply being in that social context with fascism, communism, liberalism, etc., that was around her in that time, this road, this path of service, the power of service, made new the relationships that Pier Giorgio had. He wasn't dominated by fear of death, which often can take life away from other people in order to be able to survive, but a gift of himself that we call charity properly, which comes from God itself, the life of Jesus. So this, the first one. Second is a phrase that Pier Giorgio would cry out, would shout out one evening when he and others from the meeting at work, he was from the high bourgeoisie, he took part with the Catholic trade unions. So this was during general strikes and so on, that there's a social revolt going on. It was pretty heavy in Turin that he knew about. And he was attacked by a group of socialists after one of these meetings. Pier Giorgio took a punch in the face, and he shouted back, "Your violence can't overcome the force of our faith, because Christ doesn't die." So this being identified with Jesus, it strikes me because Pier Giorgio speaks about it in the present sense. He didn't say Christ didn't die, Christ lives in ideas. It says Christ doesn't die, won't die. It's the strength of faith as it was manifest in him and this bourgeois lad in the beginning of the 19th century. So many things contributed to his formation. Again, the Jesuit Salesians, etc. I'd forgotten the conference of St. Vincent that was so important, Dominicans, etc. And nobody can kind of claim that what happened of this flowing of the life of Christ in him, they can't claim it as their own. So this circulation of life between us and Christ, us and God, then is there. That's the novelty that saves the world and we in the world. Faith not simply as an expedient that makes existence tolerable, but as another life that enters into our life and changes it, making humanly possible that which humanly would seem impossible. Think of Our Lady and to the angel. How is this possible? I don't know, man. And the angel says, no. He didn't explain how it happened, but who would do it. He said, the Holy Spirit will descend on you. And it's this life of the Holy Spirit that made present Jesus so that Pier Giorgio received in the Eucharist every day. As Marco said, he wanted to nourish himself from the Eucharist. Such a simple thing to take and eat that transformed him deeply. And this making possible what is humanly impossible had also to do not just with his life of charity, but also with forgiveness instead of revenge, service instead of power, the gift of oneself instead of exploiting and dominion, resurrection and hope in eternal life instead of consuming everything. And this is because Christ doesn't die. This verb in the present tense as what was given him to experience. Christ doesn't die. Christ is the novelty, the newness that entered in the world. Third and final phrase, and then I'll stop, is taken from the testimony of a friend. And when I read it the first time, I saw that, given him speaking things, I'll also quote Giussani. There's a title in Traces of Christian Experience that says, decided like an action, like a gesture. So his friend says, he explains why he was so struck by him. So we were undecisive and he was decisive. He was oriented. There was an endless line of disappointed and he was happy. A load of egoists and he was magnanimous. There was rhetoric all around us and from the futurists and so on. And in a time of decadence, I found in front of me a young man who was the reaction to the bad air around us. This is the novelty that Pier Giorgio constructed in his life and was the truth of Christ, the truth that is Christ, the truth that God is love. Pier Giorgio held tightly with decision his trust that Jesus would be the way, the truth, and the life. The light that's able to shine in the darkness, that will shine on this bad system of the quicksand that wouldn't let you move ahead in life. Why is this important? Because in time of the new sophists, or as you said a few years, the sort of post-truth, a time of relativism that sort of squashes human desire onto the material things. This light can reverberate, can even become joy, become happiness. And this is what his friends recognized in him. His friend Carlo, who knew him when Pier Giorgio went to germinate at his house, it seemed like he didn't have any doubt. The normality of a friendship with Christ that made it clear even the next step to do. And this step was always something against, again, the presence of Jesus Christ. I'd say these three things. For the rest of it, there's the book, which you can find to buy in the shop. Thank you. I know that I'll constrain our guests because we've got a bit of a time scale here, so that some mortifications bring many fruits, because in your capacity to get right to the essential helps all of us to have an attention straight on what's decisive here in what you're proposing. So thank you. Two future saints, we can almost call them saints, it's just a few days away, that are very young, really young people, but in a few years they had, through their life, revolutionized the world around themselves, and then successively, not just those near to them, but many far away. Let's go to discover as much as we can some essential traits of Carlo Acutis. We'll start with this interview that I mentioned before with his mum, Antonia Salzano. So thank you to Antonia Salzano Acutis, the mum of Carlo, who is with us, linked by video, and who's present at the meeting. She's been at the meeting with us a few days. She's the principal author of the exhibition, and it was the most viewed exhibition in this week at Rimini. What was the significance for you of this exhibition here at the meeting? Good evening, everybody. Certainly, I was really happy to be able to visit the exhibition. It's an exhibition that's very significant, but above all, very fresh, very essential, and that shows out the key things that were in the life of Carlo and his spiritual journey, and also gives some testimonies and some videos, and certainly the graphic part is fantastic. The whole setup, I'm really proud of them. So also how they managed to with a few panels and so on, to really sum up what was the great spiritual journey of Carlo and the path that can be imitated by everyone, because they're bringing the extraordinary into the ordinary. And this, I think, was the most important thing. So people like us, we're all called to be saints. Jesus says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And so, so we're all called to this. But Carlo is a model. Carlo is a friend who's preceded us. So certainly he lived that which are the contradictions and of our times, but also the joys. He lived with his freshness, with his positivity, his optimism, and he managed to realize this project, the project of holiness that God had this from eternity thought about for him. And really this plan, it's awaiting all of us. So take courage and so on. So this exhibition, you really can see how these elements of sainthood in his life, the life of Carlo. Above all, Carlo managed to live the presence of God in the daily life. And we used to say of Carlo, we're always we have the Holy Trinity inside of us, who dwelling inside us. And so the problem is with baptism. The problem is to commit ourselves to this presence of God within us. So I'd ask you to tell us something about this aspect of the life, to take seriously even the daily things that happen to him. Certainly, Carlo, above all, when he had 6 or 8 years, he wrote stuff about Jesus, and he wanted to go to Mass every day. He wrote every day before going to Mass. He would read the Holy Scriptures, and a life, strong interior life that's. He enjoyed sport, study, life in the family, life with the friends. But why did he go into depth? Because certainly everything, he saw the signs of the Lord. He accepted them. I never heard him complain. I never heard him speak badly of anybody. Instead, he always said that he enjoyed the light of other people. And when he heard of somebody who was speaking badly about others, he looked for what was good. He was very attentive to live this presence of God, and so to go, because he realized that it's God who is close to him, who God looks at us, and everything that he did it because he was seeking to maximize his life in this towards this end. He had He knew that every single thing has consequences, and he knew that our choices today will be determinant for our life in the future. And how often we make choices without reflecting about, and then often they determine our future life, unfortunately, and we create ourselves many crosses, many sufferings. So Carlo was very attentive. He used his time, and that was created for us. He used to, with every time. Carlo had this compulsive being good. So he didn't want to waste time. He said every minute that passes is what we have to sanctify ourselves. So it's we have no need to have any fear of death, because we only need to have fear to be afraid of sin. This, yes, because this could separate us eternally from God. So he lived with serenity and profundity. He was aware that life is a gift that needs to be maximized, lived well. That I never heard him be skeptical or getting bored, but I really believe that this is a beautiful message, a message that today, with these technological means, often take time away from us. But so we need to learn, like Carlo did, to be the masters of our time. Above all, not to be wasting our time that deep down are not so good, or that people would earn money from us in this way. So there's one thing which I want to ask you. Pope Francis always said that the closest thing to grace is humour. I was struck how I read that you said somewhere that Carlo made me laugh so much. Certainly, he was very funny. He was very nice. He had a extraordinary character in this way. He could make you laugh with things, the simplest things, even if you saw the cat or something like that, or a bird. But above all, if sometime when there's leukemia and he didn't have any hope, and so he said, well, certainly, with a big smile, that the God sent me this smile. But Carlo wasn't afraid of anything. The only thing that he as I said, was fear. Was how do you explain this sort of planetary fame of Carlo? So even at his funeral, people said that I started to pray, and that the naturally this was growing, and now every day we had clues of miracles, and above all of healings, cures that he did. So as Carlo, having this worldwide fame, it's clear that people from India, from China, from the Azores, Australia were praying to him, and so some amazing things from all around the world. I believe that this was certainly something, because the Consoler had a fame of holiness but above all, people spontaneously they prayed, and they he had a fame of sanctity that he has, and everyone was struck when he became a servant of God, and so we lived this from the beginning. Thank you very much. I'm afraid our time has already gone. So one last flash that I'll ask you for our crowd in the meeting to say, in a few days, in the 7th of September, the great canonization at Rome. Your sort of flash of sentiments, of feelings on the vigil of this, on the eve of this. Certainly, it's an important moment for people around the world, because, as you said, the Church will have this recognition of him. But I think it's the internalization of Carlo, of his beatification. So there was a bit held up by the death of Pope Francis, but this needs to make us reflect that even we too should be characterized, should be canonized. We should. And it's like the canonization of one of us. And if you follow Carlo, you can follow him like a bridge towards Jesus, because Jesus needs to be the example in heaven. But Carlo gives hope that we too can do the same thing. I feel this in my heart, that I don't feel myself privileged because I've got many defects. I'm not holy, but I know that So Christ can build straight with crooked things. So I think I need to do my part. I need to do the effort to be a witness, to give testimony, and also to respond to the graces that we've received. That might have a son so special. It was always a grace for me, with Carlo, I discovered life. I was like a Protestant. I didn't. So I lived Carlo. He saved me, and thanks to Carlo, I've understood. I discovered in my life the real living presence of Christ, also in the Eucharist, and this for me was the great discovery. And so I'm grateful, and I hope that Carlo can help many people to understand that Christ, like I'm in the darkness. I think maybe other people haven't had the fortune to have somebody who taught them their faith, or that many people can have the chance to discover for them how the truth of life. As I started this communion with Christ in this life, can experience paradise on the earth. This is what the saints teach us is possible, and we hope finally that with this canonization will bring us many graces. So I'll say thank you to you, and soon I'll ask for a great applause from the crowd in the meeting, just a way to say thank you to you, who was the mother of an exceptional boy who brought so many graces in the world and will still bring them. And I'll leave you with a phrase that was in a song of our friend, a priest friend who's passed away, who's called Anas, and who says the feast is about to start. Only Christians can say that. Thank you, madam. Thank you so much from our hearts, with the applause from the meeting for you. Thank you.
La festa sta per cominciare.
The party's about to begin. Your Eminence, Your Excellency, you're the Bishop of Assisi, where Acutis is from. You've written quite a surprising book with the title Carlo Acutis, following on from Francis of Assisi, which you took from a famous quotation from Carlo, who said that we're all originally born and then we risk to become a photocopy. Where did you discover those traces of St. Francis and also of Chiara d'Assisi in the life of Carlo Acutis? So I'll get to that in a second. I'd like to start with a quotation from another saint, someone who's still blessed, and hopefully will be canonized soon, who's a great economist, who was the advisor for Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII, Giuseppe Tommaso, this great man who, thanks to God, is slowly being discovered after a long period of almost of being forgotten for a while. In 1900, he'd known De Gasperi and these other famous politicians, and he said this famous phrase: "He who will definitely save society, it won't be a diplomat or a hero, but a saint, a society, but rather a society of saints. You know, he who will save society is Christ through us, who through him become saints with him." And it seems to me that this discussion on new saints, on young saints, these two who will be canonized very soon, and perhaps the many who will come later, has a kind of prophetic aspect here. The Lord really wants to save us. He loves us. This world, as it is, as we see it before us, is not a nice one. And politicians, even those who've come through here in the past few days, haven't been finding solutions. They need to find them. They need to try hard. And they need this fuel of Christ and of the holiness of those who belong to him. Carlo, like Pier Giorgio, is in this logic, and they play this important role in the world of today. The first millennial saint, as they like to say, from the 90s to the first years of the 2000s, to say to the world, to the church, what he's saying, that after my canonization, and you could say the same for Pier Giorgio, you got no excuses now. Now, being saints, it should be something, and it should be imperative. You know, we can explain with our lives that becoming a saint doesn't mean doing extraordinary things, but putting the extraordinary things that God can do within our lives. So St. Francis is an extraordinary saint par excellence. The Franciscans for 8 centuries have been trying to imitate him, and they struggle greatly. And Carlo himself said, you know, while he was in Assisi, you know, Antonia didn't say it, so I'll say it now. He said, Carlo said, I want to be saint, but not like St. Francis, who did a lot of penitence. Rather, I want to stay in Assisi. Assisi represented for him a message that was possible to translate into modern terms, in contemporary terms, because he discovered this, you know, that we need to do even with Francis. Francis, even though he was a saint at his stature, in his context, he was, you know, basically cannot be imitated. He's, you know, they said some things that are so unique, that are so still applicable to the modern day, that someone like Carlo could apply them to his own life today. For example, let's start with joy. His mum said here that as a character, he was a happy guy, but certainly it's his joy, much like from Pier Giorgio. I was hearing similar things earlier about Pier Giorgio. It came from deep within their heart. I asked myself, what is it that draws so many young people around all the world? You can't imagine the numbers of young people I'm finding in Assisi these days. When I came in 2006, the year in which Carlo died in Milan, we'd call it now the square of the square in the main square. It's in a day like this, I'd see it full of, you know, I'd see maybe 3 or 4 people in a normal year. You know, maybe in an entire year it might see 2, 3, 4, 10,000 maybe as a whole year. But last year we had almost 1 million people in that square, and this year we might even have more. But you know what's happening here? I'm seeing these kids who are not even just kids, but everyone. They arrived at that tomb, and they're immediately inspired. That they're filled with a sense of peace and of joy. Let's not forget that joy is the thing that Jesus gave us, and he said it himself, because, you know, so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be fulfilled. Christianity without joy is not Christianity. You know, and Jesus already saved us, and we often say that, you know, Jesus and joy in Jesus. Carlo teaches us this, like all the saints. In Assisi, Francis, you know, how does Carlo translate the life of Francis into his own life? You know, he took the canticle. St. Francis did it. And he did it in a moment in which, you know, there's darkness now, there's lights out. St. Francis did it in a very dark point of his life, you know, dark in terms of his physical health, but also of his morale. He was truly at rock bottom, and there he creates the canticle, you know, brother sun, brother moon. You know, the canticle is almost like a hidden heart. You know, one of my next books is the hidden heart of the canticle, and you see that in the final sections, the bits that we usually gloss over. You know, the suffering, the sister death. Within this context of suffering, of sister death, St. Francis he explodes in there, and Carlo is the canticle, kind of embodied. A journalist wanted to know from me, and I told him, you know, please ask his mum, how many dogs did Carlo have? You know, come on. He loved animals. He loved everything. He loved nature. He loved the sea. He loved swimming. For Carlo, the beauty of life was the beauty of creation. So what St. Francis lived in the canticle, and also with his was typical of his times, Carlo translated that into today. The young people come to Assisi and they find a St. Francis who sings and a Carlo who follows his example with his life. So another important element that's for me, and you've seen the sanctuary of the undressing. How did it come to mind to put him in the sanctuary of undressing? You know that we had to reflect a lot on what to do there. An answer came to me, and it was put in a chapter of this book, from the undressing of Francis to that of Carlo. And this was a bit, I'd thought about this a lot. St. Francis had undressed in front of the Father, and he said, "Enough with your money. I strip myself of everything." And he said, "Jesus is my treasure." But what did Carlo get undressed with? We've seen his family here. He had everything he could have wanted. He lived it within his means in an honest way. He didn't buy too many shoes. He was a simple guy. He went around in the street, and and like Pier Giorgio, he went and he saw Christ in the beggars, in the homeless. So what did he undress of? He had everything. And what happened to me, to what I discovered at the end? I think it's a discovery. Then you can argue amongst yourselves, but when reflecting on that video, that I don't know how many of you already seen it, because it's on internet. It's a clip that he was he was very good technologically. Carlo was, and in that video, his mother, Carlo's mother, discovered this video after his death, and she assures me that by seeing it together, it would have been made a couple of months before his death, when there still wasn't a single symptom of the illness that ended up affecting him. And so he was in the flower of his youth, of his desire to live, to share. He says, I'm destined to die. It was an interior premonition of his. And how does he answer? Go and watch that video. He answers with a smile. And he opens his arms as if to hug death. When I showed this to a journal of the Washington Post, they said, this is worrying, this is strange. And I said, well, try and understand it better. What did Carlo say with that gesture? Carlo said exactly what Francis had said 8 centuries before. He said, "I trust Christ so much. He's my treasure. He's my everything, that I'm convinced that even interrupting in this moment, in the flower of my youth, we'll do great things together with Christ, and He's doing them now." And that's why if you come to the sanctuary of the undressing, you'll find an image which I've put at the front, and it's on the cover of the book. Carlo on one hand, and St. Francis, the classic image made by Giorgio, on the other. These two saints who work together. They're a team in a perfect way, and they're there together with a finger pointed towards Jesus at the altar. Two saints for whom, as with all the others, Jesus was really everything. So, Bernhard, I hope that the meeting can discover this great economist I was talking about earlier, who's been forgotten for a long time, but perhaps now the Americans will know him more than us. I had an English copy of a book I was talking about earlier, The Human Economy. The Human Economy. He who will save society won't be a diplomat, a doctor, or a hero, but a saint, and rather a society of saints. So that the meeting may be a nice little society of saints, I hope. And I think that Carlo and Pier Giorgio will come to say this to us, along with the saints of the stature of St. Francis.
Per quanto riguarda Tonioli,
So I've received the message about Tonioli you just mentioned there, but so all 4 the people we've heard from today have made it clear that Pier Giorgio Frassati and Carlo Acutis were not superheroes. They weren't heroes for their own human capacity that they shared, but rather they were extraordinary people because they let themselves be moved by God, by the Eucharist, by the encounter with Christ within their own lives. And so I'll show you the title of next year's meeting, which is taken from the Divine Comedy by Dante and is the final line. I'll tell you very briefly how we came to choose this phrase, because in the meeting, these many months of preparation of the meeting, we encountered, and then we'll, through the exhibitions, and then we've seen it, we made it clear to all of you through these shows and the conferences today. We've met many people who brought new bricks of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of a particular social effort, a social intelligence, the joy that we've just been hearing about, an extraordinary sense of charity that was the life of Frassati and of many others present in the meeting in these days from over 20 countries in the world. So we always ask that question, from where do they draw this energy, the perseverance, the patience, the genuineness with which they've introduced these novelties and this life in places where it seemed like, death prevailed in many cases. So we'd like to propose for the next meeting to deepen the awareness of the fact that the main principle of the beginning and the end of the universe, in which in whose flux we are in the middle of in our with our lives and with our freedoms, it's a good destiny. It's a love, as Dante says, and we'd like to discover. And for that, I'd like to thank His Excellency for the quotation of Tognoli. We'd like to discover even the consequences of a renewal of civil society, of those desert places where many people are unable to build new things. So we'd like to take this title as a new horizon, new events, and to understand the events in the world which has been assigned to us. If you'd allow me to underline that which I said at the beginning, I think it's very important to reflect on the word moves. It's not something static. There's movement through which we act and we live through this, because the incidents of the life of these two new saints is simply incomprehensible from the human perspective. It's within that movement in their lives. They were driven by something, and they were allowed themselves to be driven on. And so we'll have a lot to discover, a lot to share. And I invite you already from now. I said at the beginning that from a certain point of view, this last meeting today of this meeting is in a certain way the first encounter of the next meeting. And I hope I was able to explain the connection there. I thank you all for being here. I thank our three guests for being here and for coming to talk to us, and for the intelligence with which they've introduced these two new saints to us, who on the 7th of September will be elevated. We thank you all for this meeting, which has been a great gift, and I hope that some small element that you've learnt in your lives from this meeting, you can bring it to the places where this evening or tomorrow morning, to wherever you'll be going back to. Thank you.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo
Proporre con la propria vita.
esiste anche grazie a te.
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
Littere Communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. Littere Communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete a Littere Communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene,